Dash Through Shellstorm, March 8, 1916. I was ordered out yesterday afternoon on a car I had not driven before, a Buick, to take a padre and 2 men to Tavannes and bring back wounded. On the way there, in the daylight at 5:30, I saw my road was being bombarded. It was absolutely clear, a bad sign, and the French soldiers lower down pointed out to me Jack Johnson's smoking higher up. Also, I saw lots of little splodges across the road made by 5-inch shells. What was I to do? There was about half a mile of that road. The car was going all right. I must either reverse 1/4 of a mile and wait in comparative safety, as I heard afterwards the next car did, or risk it. I decided to do the latter, set my teeth, looked neither to right nor to left, paid no attention to the flashes or to the shell holes, and made that car travel at its very best. The men inside must have got a considerable jolting. I reached the fort all right, and was agreeably surprised when the doctor in charge shook hands and congratulated me. I found my wounded waiting, but was not allowed to turn out for 2 hours. Part of that time I went to the entrance of the fort and watched the flashes and listened to the whizzes. Suddenly the wood on my right burst into flame. A number of French 75s simultaneously opened fire and turned the darkness into daylight. For 10 or 15 minutes the rattle went on continuously like many machine guns. Where the shells dropped in the distance a bright red glow sprang up and disappeared as the guns ceased. I was told that the Germans had left their trenches and were making an attack after their long bombardment, and this was their reception. I cannot imagine how anything can have been left alive in that terrible hail of shells. The journey home was peaceful enough after my experience on the way out. For 3/4 of an hour I was held up with a block of traffic, and wondered why none of the shells flying around found us. We should have been a good harvest for well-placed shrapnel. I was nervous about that half-mile of road, but peace had descended upon it when I got there, and all was well. A French conductor behind me got a shell clean through the carriage-work of his empty ambulance. Fortunately, he and his aide escaped, but the car was minus 1 wheel for some time. I have just seen the holes, of which he is very proud. A famous road. There is one French railway into the salient of Verdun. The road from Bar-le-Duc to Verdun measures 58 kilometers, about 35 miles. For more than a month now, many camions, heavy and light lorries, innumerable motor omnibuses, and military cars have been unceasingly plying backwards and forwards over that highway. Troops, guns, ammunition of all kinds, food, the whole reinforcement of all these things has gone to the front by road. A small army of men is busy keeping the thoroughfare in repair. The traffic is directed and organized most carefully. Once I was on it near Verdun on a little job of my own, in the middle of a convoy conveying heavy ammunition, when we were saluted with about 50 shells that a German balloon had kindly initiated. The whole hillside suddenly seemed to be on fire. Happily, they were a little previous. I spent 2 or 3 nights in an extemporized hospital built halfway along the road. The little window facing my stretcher bed looked out onto a continual succession of motor lights slowly moving at regular intervals towards Verdun, for all the world like the lamps of some interminable marine parade set in motion. Day and night these camions run up and down. There are 2 men on each. One sleeps while the other drives. Perhaps sometimes they are allowed a day off. I don't know. Their devotion has been beyond words. Sometimes one meets a mile of these cars, then an interval of a few hundred yards, then half a mile, and so on. I saw one upset down the bank. It contained shell cartridges, and the petrol tank was slowly distributing its contents over them. I did not linger to see the result. This road, with the men who have worked these lorries, has already become famous. Even heavy guns are nowadays taken up in lorries and troops in motor omnibuses. The motor has displaced the railway. A road may be in places under shell fire, but it is infinitely easier to repair than a railway line, and given a sufficiency of lorries, the weight of traffic that can be carried is not only far greater, but more elastic and more easy to handle and regulate. The girl we lost our hearts to. Cameras might be used with discretion. Hospital tents. Interior. Sleeping quarters at Vadelaine-Court. Helmets. We had our gas masks and goggles issued to us in November last, and very pretty we looked in them. Later on, we got a new pattern of gas mask, and a fortnight before Verdun, our steel helmets. Every French soldier is provided with a helmet, and though they generally give the wearer a headache for the first few days, their value is thoroughly appreciated. It is not only against shrapnel that these casques are very useful, but also for protection against the hard mud and showers of stones that percussion shells throw up. We learned to value them very much, and we never went out without them under fire. The British, I see, have not yet got 500,000. Ours is indeed a weird government. Perhaps the necessary 3 million will be ready in 2 years' time. Why do we continue to make ourselves the laughingstock of the world over this recruiting business? The French cannot understand us, and I don't blame them. Compulsion for all men of military age is the only way, and it is 12 months overdue, and yet our old ladies at Westminster still go on haggling over exemptions and conscientious scruples. Send the House of Commons and the Cabinet out here for a month. One is beginning to be half ashamed of being an Englishman. I hear that one French officer has put in a very excellent report of our work at Verdun, and that we have been mentioned in dispatches. This is really nice of him. At the same time, we all have an uneasy feeling that we might have done better. Perhaps another opportunity will arrive. There is something very fascinating in picking up wounded under conditions as near to hell as I wish to imagine. After one gets accustomed to the noise of the guns and shells, and finds that somehow one doesn't get hit, and that there are always 4 wheels on the car, it is with a feeling of genuine satisfaction over a good night's work that one returns to the cozy sleeping bag. A few war items. There is no doubt that the German troops, in their disastrous attack on Vaux, were drugged. I forget the name of the liquor they were provided with. They carried it in bottles, and it was stronger than whiskey. I was told by the medicine chef at one point of the forts that many of the prisoners taken that night were inebriated, and the story has since been confirmed from many sources. They came on 16 deep, the front ranks stooping down with a hand shading their eyes, and their dead lay in a heap over 6 feet high. It is also true that in some cases the German gunners are chained to their guns. The average duration of life of the German liquid fire operator in action must be exceedingly short. This apparatus, which is carried on the back of one man with a pump operated by another, has a range of about 40 yards, and as the mixture is naturally much lighter than air and therefore curls up at the end, its actual working range is reduced to 35 yards or even less. To ensure the proper manipulation of this truly German device, it is necessary for both men to stand upright. Walking upright to within 30 or 40 yards of a French trench is the quickest method I can imagine of solving the great question of the future. What happens? The first man is killed, a second takes his place, then a third, and so on. Truly German discipline and German courage is marvelous. Since the introduction of masks, the German gas attacks are no longer feared. So long as the masks are worn tightly enough, the gas can do no harm, and to ensure this precaution being properly carried out, all the French soldiers at the front have had to shave off their beards. The 1916 class, boys of 20, are already with the German troops, some of them dead or wounded at Verdun. After the 1916 class there remains the 1917, now boys of 19, and then no more. Query, how long will the war last? In the actual attacks and repulses there are not many prisoners taken. The days of the permanent fort are over. It is not worthwhile building a redoubt strong enough to resist a German 17-inch shell. Liège and Namur taught the world the destructive power of 380s and 420s. Around Verdun there are plenty of forts. If the enemy choose to knock these mounds to pieces, he can do so. It follows that the extraordinarily heavy artillery of the Germans is no longer worth either its cost or its trouble. A shell that costs £1,000 or more may be indispensable against a battleship, but can anyone conceive any object on land that is worth the expenditure of several hundred of these monsters? And after all, their effect is not so very terrible. Probably the damage done to Verdun itself is not so great as the cost of the shells employed in doing it, and from a military point of view, against troops in the open or trenches, the money would be far better expended on smaller and more mobile and rapid-firing artillery. I have listened to a continuous heavy German bombardment for 24 hours. I have seen the woods peppered with heavy shells, the black smoke of the 15-inch slowly curling up from the trees, the flashes of the bursting shrapnel just above them. It sounded very dreadful. At the end of the 24 hours, the German infantry endeavored to make an advance. The woods that had endured all this heavy gunnery and ought to have been dead woke up as if nothing had happened. The men came out of their dugouts. The light rapid-firing 75s spoke with one voice for 10 minutes, and one more costly German attack was over. The fort has been superseded by the trench. The monster gun is a failure. The infantry still remain the great deciding factor in warfare with the machine gun and the bayonet. As for those examples of German frightfulness, the gas attack, the liquid fire machine, they have also their antidotes. The ingenious Hun must invent something else. Rest. We left Verdun on March 10th, some with gun headache, most of us exceedingly tired. The iron-roofed riding school in which we slept with our cars and shared with a French convoy of Fiats vibrated with every heavy gun fired from a battery behind. Shrapnel occasionally burst a short distance away. There were 3 big Jack Johnson holes in the field near. One night the roof rattled and window panes fell out under a shower of something we knew not what, and didn't much care. Cars came in and left at all hours of the day and night, smothering us with their exhausts. For 14 days we had not our clothes off, and slept only in fitful half-hours. One mentally remonstrated that after having run the gauntlet of Shell Lane, the never-ceasing bombardment should sound closer at night, and disturb our few hours' rest. Mais c'est la guerre. It was a question of endurance, and we were new to the conditions. So we left Verdun very willingly after having done our bit, and once again our French officer was pleased to be complimentary. "Hurrah! Tonight we will dine at a cafe, we will have baths, take off our clothes, and perhaps sleep in a bed. We have had enough of war for the time being, and both ourselves and our cars want a rest." Out of an original 17 motor ambulances, only 9 were able to take the road, and one of these, alas, at the end of a rope. The melting snow made travelling difficult, and all the way to Bar-le-Duc, some 58 kilometers, we followed and passed an endless succession of lorries and motor omnibuses. We might, but for the condition of the road, have been in the city. At last we arrived, and waited patiently in a square for 3 or 4 hours, hungry but expectant. Then the order came to be en route again, and in 20 minutes we were pulled up a few kilometers farther on in a narrow lane, deep with mud, where, with nothing to eat and nowhere to sleep, our cars were full of petrol and stores, we were left to spend the night as best we could. Oh, happy organization! We did not want a palace, but only rest, food, and soap and water. "C'est la guerre," we were told, and we didn't altogether believe it. We had learnt to lie comfortably on stretchers, and luxuriously on straw. It wasn't amusing to sit up all night, weary, unwashed, unshaven, and hungry, waiting for the dawn. When that long night was over, we got back to the town, and got rooms, helped ourselves to them, and now I have a real bed, with blankets and sheets, plenty of water, even warm water, a writing table, in fact, all the comforts of modern civilization. We dine where we choose, being under the impression that we deserve to do ourselves well. Even the post is arriving. Alternately, we do 24 hours duty moving wounded from stations to hospitals, or vice versa. The sun is shining, and all is well. Even one of the broken-down cars, which we have not seen for 5 months, has come back. Vadelaincourt. Have you ever been to Vadelaincourt? Of course not. Well, don't go! It is a little village 15 kilometers from Verdun, and lies at the bottom of a muddy little valley with a muddy little stream running through it. In fine weather it is all dust, in wet, thick, soupy mud. When our convoy first made its acquaintance in the early days of Verdun, the cars had great difficulty in ploughing through. A month later the roads had been scraped, and big banks along all the lanes testified to the work done. But the mud was still there, plenty of it. The hospital consists of wood shanties and tents. When the rains come, it is almost under water, and from hut to hut and tent to tent, little raised paths have been constructed, presumably to prevent the staff being drowned. We left Bar-le-Duc at 5 one morning, and arrived here at 8. We have now been here a week without any work to do. There are English, American, and Franco-British sections, about 44 cars in all. Some of us sleep in our ambulances, others in a very dirty shed on ancient straw and hay, very much alive, but fortunately with animals that seem disinclined to change their residences. A rat sleeps, when the visiting cat will let it, in the corner next to me. The shed is about 4/5 roofed, and we have closed some of the broken windows with hospital blankets. But the rain comes in down one side, and the wind blows through in gales. It is necessary to tread very gently, or clouds of live dust would settle all over the sleeping bags. On the opposite side to ours sleep some 20 British Red Cross conducteurs from one of the English convoys lent to the French. One of them plays on the flute regularly from 8:30 to every night. From 8:30 to 10 every night. Lead, kindly light, sweet and low, the rosary, etc. I hear him in my dreams mixed with the noise of the guns 10 miles away and the rattle of an occasional midnight aeroplane. 4 or 5 times a day a priest and an acolyte bearing a cross go by, and behind an old cart bringing for burial 5 more men from the hospital. The evacuation to the cemetery goes on day by day as regularly as the evacuation to the railway station. There are no mourners. We stand up and salute. The priest in his dirty white robe, the ancient cart, the soiled French flag with its tribute to the men who have died to save France. Mort pour la patrie, together with the muddy cemetery with its closely packed rows of little wooden crosses, will live in my memory with the groans of the men I helped to carry down from Fort Tavannes on those ghastly midnight journeys in and out of hell. The French Soldier. Let me say a word or two in praise of that wonderful man, the French soldier. My few months' experience out here has taught me how Napoleon won his victories. It is not a question of bravery or courage. There is probably nothing to choose between the nations in this respect. But it is his marvelous patience and endurance. I have no hesitation in saying that the French soldier will endure and fight, and continue to endure and fight, when the Englishman would be very likely to go on strike. Look at Verdun. French soldiers met and beat off that huge German onslaught of 450,000 men, backed up with 3,000 pieces of artillery, for 5 days. The same men, without rest, some without food, for 48 hours together. They retired and retired, giving back yard by yard, pouring in shrapnel from their 75s, getting home again and again with the bayonet, inflicting losses 3-1. The weight of metal thrown by those powerful German guns was terrible. For a long time the defending force could make but a feeble reply to it. The Germans had counted on battering a way through, as they did in Russia. For days the ceaseless hail of shells went on. The French soldier waited, enduring it, waited until the infantry attack came, and then the Boches paid in full. The Service de Santé is the poor relation of the French army. It has been greatly strengthened and improved by outside aid, but it is far, far from perfect. Night after night I have spent in improvised hospital yards with my car full of wounded, waiting hours to be unloaded. I have seen the wounded who were able to walk trudging down 4, 5, or 8 kilometers to the hospital to be left there many hours outside in snow and sleet, without food or help except such little aid as we could sometimes give them. It is not the fault of the doctors. They were worked to death. Merely that ample arrangements hadn't been made. Yet it was all so obvious and so pathetic, and the French Tommy took it all as a matter of course and didn't grumble. Well may France be proud of her soldiers. August 1916. I left the convoy being overhauled at Bar-le-Duc. In August 1916, I rejoined, driving over the latest thing in American ambulances, strong, powerful, and slow. My Minerva, I heard, was doing useful work in Paris. En route, our transport was held up for 12 hours in the Solin, awaiting the kindly attentions of the torpedo boat that shepherded us across. What a relief it was to cross on a military boat and be saved all the long tedious delays and worries of passport and medical examination. We saw our cars on board, got leave till the boat started, and had no further trouble, and at Havre All that it was necessary to do was to wait till the ambulances were swung onto the dockside, get them filled up with essence, and then start on the lovely run up the Seine, where the sun was blessing the busy harvesters, through Rouen to Paris. None of the depredations of war are visible in this beautiful district, but Havre and Rouen are so full of British soldiers that it is difficult to realize that one is not still in England. A night or two in Paris awaiting orders, and then another delightful run by the side of the Marne to Vitry. I saw very few signs of the Germans. A few destroyed houses, a few graves in the fields. In one inn, a German bullet fired through the door by some Boche in a playful mood still remained in a fractured mirror. Sentries stopped us and examined our papers, and at last we reached Bar-le-Duc, which was not quite so full of troops, lorries, and all the organizations of war as when I left 3 months before. It is difficult to get a meal in these places. All the little inns, which are remarkably reasonable in their prices, must have made their fortunes long ago. I found the convoy 15 kilometers away, rejuvenated in men and cars, and doubled in size, perched on the top of a hill, idling in the sunshine, and worried with the flies. The guns sounded far away. There were rumors of plenty of work to come in a day or two. All the convoy cars are now practically of the same type. A light lorry with a heavy ambulance body of wood. These buses are useful, amenable, and fortunately, for we have no billets beyond our big mess tent, can be made into very fair sleeping quarters. The dust and the flies are the chief troubles, but these are only to be expected and endured. I have a sort of combined summer balaclava helmet and goggles, which make me look like a gargoyle, but save a great deal of soap and water. Another Verdun experience. This section had an interesting 10 days near Verdun in my absence. They ran into that dilapidated town every night and spent the time in the cellars until they could get away with their wounded. Here is the report on our work. From Second Lieutenant Klingelhofer, commanding the SSA 10, to the Médecin Principal, in charge of the medical service of the 31st Division of Infantry. The SSA 10 consists of ambulance cars presented and driven by English drivers, all of whom have passed the age limit. 3 are more than 50, 6 more than 45, and 3 more than 40 years old, or been rejected by the British military authorities. The section was attached to the 31st Infantry Division on July 31st, 1916, and was entrusted with the removal of the wounded of the division from the Thiaumont-Fleury sector from the 3rd to the 15th August, 1916. The cars worked from Bras, La Sape de Belfort, and Belleville to Verdun, and from there to La Queue de Malat, Fontaine-Bouton, and Ballycourt. The night work was particularly hard, as the cars had to run without lights over roads which were under artillery fire, such roads being full of artillery convoys and much knocked about by shell fire. During this period, the section has removed 3,257 wounded or sick cases. 3 cars have been damaged or struck by shell splinters. Most of the drivers suffered from dysentery, but refused to be relieved, having at heart the continuation of the service during this very busy time. 3,257 removals in 13 days was hard enough work to satisfy anyone. The difficulty was driving night and day to keep awake. Every 36 to 48 hours one had to sleep. The alternative was disaster. It is possible to sleep riding and even marching, I believe, but no one has yet succeeded in doing so satisfactorily when driving a car. The convoy has a new French officer in charge, and everyone is happy and full of zeal. Our old worries, most of them entirely unnecessary, seem to have completely disappeared, and all is well. May we be really useful and have good fortune. A very fair sample of a tropical thunderstorm visited us yesterday. It blew in our big mess tent in which I was sleeping, fortunately without damage, and 3 of us had an interesting hour between 3 and 4 a.m. in our pajamas out in the rain driving in the pegs. The inevitable result of the storm was a very muddy field, and cars on duty had to be pushed out by hand to the hard road. A week of this, and we should have stuck fast. The news has just arrived that Romania has come in. Some of the villages round here are intact, others a hopeless mass of ruins. The German seems to have been very capricious in his artillery attentions. The road to Verdun is comparatively, as compared with March and April last, deserted. A few convoys of camions only. The endless stream no longer flows. I saw a fresh regiment of infantry motored up in buses the other day, and later on the same cars returned full of weary men, covered with mud from head to foot, many of them asleep. They greeted us in a way that left no doubt of their joy in returning to peace and quietness. We have spent 3 weeks in our muddy field, playing bridge and chess and waiting for work. Every day we are going to work, and we are still here. But the time will come. We left Roumont on September 11th on the hottest of days. The convoy, 2/3 of a mile long, stirred up the dust, and passing convoys doubled it, until we were soon as white as millers and as thirsty as the desert. It was only a 2 hours' trip, and at 11:30 a.m. we were drawn up in line in the field where we were to spend days or weeks or months. Who knows? Our route took us nearly to Clermont, through several ruined villages, to Vercourt, where the Germans had been for 9 days but had done little damage. It was there we encamped. 4 hours later I was off on duty to the Maison Forestière in the Argonne, a little poste de secours in the forest within 3 kilometers of the German lines, where everybody lived underground. I arrived in the dark and was shown my dugout, and noticed the rats scampering round. I preferred to sleep in my car, shells or no shells, and spent a peaceful evening with not a shell falling within a mile. The lines have been unchanged here for 2 years, and the dugouts, communications, trenches, and cemetery are consequently all rather elaborate. The little wooden crosses. The farm at Bellevue. Comfortable quarters near Villiers-Cotterêts. Pierrefonds Château, rebuilt. The Maison Cemetery. André and Maurice. Our daily life. There are now 25 of us, ranging in age from 22 to 57. Our cars are all drawn up in line in a field, which will inevitably become unpleasantly muddy. Today the sun is shining, and all the cars are open, back, sides, and front, taking the air. There are 5 or 6 gaps representing the ambulances out on duty. Nearly all the machines are GMCs from America, light lorries, slow but sure. A glance into the ambulance bodies reveals all sorts and conditions of cleanliness. The cars next on duty are stripped, ready for action. Of the others, some are clean, some are not. In one you see a sleeping bag comfortably arranged on a suspended stretcher, towels and washing materials, sponge bag, mirror, etc., all neatly fixed. The driver sleeps in his car and takes a pride in it and in himself. Next to this you see a higgledy-piggledy arrangement of dirty boots, Primus stove, frying pans, sleeping clothes, a few stray eggs on the seat. All these, when a call comes, will be thrown out at a moment's notice, left under a rug, and be sorted and possibly cleaned when the opportunity arrives. Some 8 or 10 of us sleep in a barn. It is more convenient, though less independent, than using one's car, and has the advantage that the ambulance is always ready for use. Others have found rooms in the village. We get up a little before 7, partially dress, find a cup of hot coffee in the kitchen, and bread and butter and jam, or tinned food in the tent, and then, if it is not our turn out, proceed at 8 to make a leisurely and complete toilet in the open at the back of the cars, with water brought from the well. We are not allowed to drink any water in this village. Those who have come in overnight generally postpone their ablutions until the dirty work on the car has been attended to. There is more need for soap and water then. So at 9 o'clock you can see a dozen or so of half-naked Englishmen enjoying themselves with soap and water and many towels, some clean, hanging in the sun to dry. At 11 we have déjeuner, or soup. There is a long, cranky table down the center of the tent, and cranky forms unevenly balanced on which to sit. The cook, who isn't a cook, as, alas, we found out long ago, but a barber in Paris, brings in some hot meat and vegetables. These last are generally white beans. There seems to be a scarcity of potatoes. The meat may or may not be eatable, the odds are against it, but there are parcels from England. Perhaps someone has brought out a ham. Its life is short. And there are tinned peaches and apricots and jam, with bread and butter. The latter, happily, generally tastes better than it smells. Afterwards coffee, with perhaps a soupçon of rum in it. Café avec is quite good. No, on the whole, we don't live luxuriously. Our evening meal at 6 o'clock is a replica of the first. We have red and white wine to drink, and some beer. One eats to live. There isn't any pleasure in our meals, nor in the continual cleaning up of cups and knives and forks afterwards. But food is a necessity, and has to be endured. In bad weather the tent shelters us all, and we amuse ourselves as best we can in the intervals between work, and are most of us back again in our little flea bags by 9 o'clock. To remind us that there may some day be a call for all our energies, the guns close at hand keep up an erratic concert. We have ceased to be even interested in them. They have become monotonous. There is none of that mosquito-like singing noise that means you are well in the danger zone. There is none of that mosquito-like singing noise that means you are well in the danger zone, and that for all you know your number may be up. The personnel of the convoy is perhaps the most interesting study of all. Watch the gradual development of the newly arrived member who has left a life of ease and luxury at home to rough it out here. The shocks to his mental equanimity when he discovers slowly but surely that he does not know everything about motor cars, that he is not necessarily the final authority on war matters, that his long stories, so much enjoyed, let us hope, by a devoted, admiring family at home, are not even listened to. The gentle digs, sometimes not too gentle, that day by day come to him from his critical companions. The long days and weeks of waiting, and then the sudden strain of really hard work under fire. The ordeal that finds out the man. This study of character, and character development of success and failure, is more interesting than even the war itself. There is the man who talks and the man who works. Some men's experiences are always terrible. Others come home and say nothing, and it is only afterwards you learn that they must have had at least an interesting time. And the surprises you get. The men you don't expect to do well amaze you by the placid way they take, in an emergency, everything that comes. The grumbler ceases to grumble, and even is apparently satisfied with his food. The absorbing interest in his work and those singing shells make a different man of him for the time being. Then the disappointments, the drivers whose cars suddenly develop mysterious defects and show a disinclination to face the music, but voila! There it is, they cannot help it, and it is not to be supposed they are proud of it, and happily it is generally only temporary. Today I am on duty for 24 hours in a dugout. My car stands outside under the trees. It is a little poste de secours about 5 kilometers from the German lines, a small Red Cross settlement all underground, in the middle of a wood. To get to my modest habitation, you go down 4 or 5 deep steps, about 2 feet deep each. You then stoop down, hit your head against the roof, and enter your dry earth room. There is a table and 2 benches, and a mud couch wide enough for 2 people. There is also an open fireplace, which is very useful, as it is raining hard. I lunched there, and I shall dine there tonight, and probably in time I shall learn not to hit my head against the beam over the door. We had a recherché lunch, my aide and I. Soup à la oxo, tinned tongue, bread and cheese, and chocolate, and a bottle of Grave, all by candlelight. Tonight we open with tinned lobster instead of soup, and the rest of the menu the same as at lunch. So we do ourselves well. In the meantime we have taken 4 wounded down to Rairecourt. There is a particularly steep and rough hill to descend, and the journey was interesting to me, if not to my cases. The road was too narrow to allow the car to turn round, as it persistently tried. Besides, it is exceedingly difficult work going down a steep hill backwards, so I had to allow it to slide its hindquarters gently against the bank and then start again. We got down all right without using much petrol. We also just got up coming back, my back wheels going all out and the car crawling. A little more rain and a dark night, lights are forbidden, and that hill will be impossible. Six of our members have got the Croix de Guerre. Our English officer and our hard-worked sergeant received it after our first visit to Verdun. The other 4 were awarded it after their second stay in that interesting and ever-to-be-remembered city. Alas, I missed the second visit. We are quite willing and even anxious to go and stay there months. It is the best thing we have seen, and this life is dull compared with it. Life is becoming interesting. The rain has disappeared. We no longer wallow in mud. Our rheumatism has gone. The sun shines, and we have got a cook. A real cook. He came from a general. There was some trouble about the potatoes, I believe. Anyhow, we are faring well. He can make the rations eatable, and with the etceteras we supply, some of his dishes are really tempting. The other night, tell it in a whisper, We had 5 courses. It is true we cannot manage more than 2 clean plates each, but with a little bread to clean up with between, what does that matter? One can easily arrange the meat course on the soup plate, and even the entree, but it is almost indispensable to have a clean plate for chocolate soufflé, and then there comes the difficulty of how to deal with one's cheese. And we have coffee and milk for breakfast, and coffee after déjeuner and dinner. It is true we still have only the 1 knife, fork, and spoon each, which we carry about with us among our most precious possessions, and sometimes try to clean. To be always cleaning knives, forks, and spoons and cups is a nuisance. But some mess cutlery for general use has been ordered, and then we shall be able to keep our own little outfits for use while on duty. One of our members has got knives that won't rust, and only want wiping with a cloth. Their never-failing brightness makes mine try and hide themselves ashamed under the rim of my plate. We are messing in our tent, which is too warm in fine weather, too cold at other times, and dripping wet when the rain comes, but close at hand a big wooden hut is being erected, 30 meters by 10. It is not for us, we are told, but we think we know better. It is close to our cars, so close that either it is for us, or we are to be moved on, and as our division is here for many weeks, we draw our own conclusions, and dream of palaces with boarded floors and 2 stoves. Our tent has no floor. It is the end of September. Sit in it after dinner, and your feet become lumps of ice. Soon the time for tents will be over, and, well, they are building a hut just where we want it. Two days ago, a French officer came along and took me for a walk to improve his English and my exceedingly bad French. In the distance I saw 3 huts like the one that is not for us. We went there, and the kindly captain in charge showed us round. In one of these warm, cozy structures, 96 men were sleeping, and there were hooks on which to hang things and all sorts of home-like comforts. Then we were shown where the men lived before these places were erected, buried in the wood, quite out of reach of prying German aeroplanes, was a little prehistoric native village. Little mud huts sealed round with clay, picturesque half-timbered one-storied buildings, some faced with moss, others with bracken, or closely fenced with twigs, huts of all shapes and sizes, a few with boarded walls and floors, all containing their homemade bedsteads and rows of shelves, some as small as 2-berth cabins. There are ruined towns and villages in plenty all round, hundreds of them. They are all much alike. In a few months, kindly nature makes the green grass grow through the stones, and the brick and stone mounds lose their soreness. But I have never seen anything like this village. Lift it bodily to London, and it would be the most popular exhibition in the metropolis. Matters are improving here. One of our men whose 2 sons are in the British Army saw the German artillery bag 6 French soldiers this morning, and the French in return bring down a German aeroplane, which, he said, collapsed like a shot pheasant. It is these little incidents which atone for days of dullness. The land of desolation. I was permitted by our very charming general the other day to go through the trenches here. He came and saw us cooking eggs and eating sardines, using as our table a heap of logs. He was very pleasant, congratulated us on our last Verdun performance, asked after our general comfort, ordered a little hut and table to be erected for our use, and gave us permission to see the lines, perhaps the most perfectly constructed scheme of defense on the Western Front. For 2 years the French and Germans have faced each other in this place without moving, and during that time the French have certainly dug themselves in. In casks and mackintoshes, in spite of the warm day, we tramped and twisted about above and below ground, in trenches and in deep tunnels, up and down hand-over-hand ladders in perpendicular shafts, through long concrete passages 30 feet underground, down steep and narrow staircases to subterranean sleeping quarters ventilated by pipes leading from the dynamo chamber, in and out of cunningly concealed machine gun emplacements, through or under fields of rusty barbed wire, with bristling chevaux de frise ready to drop to block a passage or a trench, while a machine close at hand poured into it 500 shots a minute. No German aimed at my cask that day, but it saved my head a score of times against those timbers. Gradually we worked forward through the third and second lines, right to the listening posts in the land of desolation. We peeped through holes, and the enemy was no doubt peeping at us. Only a few yards, 3 or 4 score, divided us. The trees of the forest had disappeared. No grass grew in that region. Shells and bombs and torpedoes had churned up the earth over and over again. All was turbulent waste and desolation. Our guide was most obliging, but he didn't keep us there long. He said it was unhealthy, and we believed him. Now I am writing this on the table the General provided for us, about 3/4 of a mile behind that unholy land, and a German plane up above is awaking the ire of many 75s around. It is pretty to see the plane, glistening in the sun, sailing in and out of the white smoke puffs as if they were sent up for its amusement. A French friend asked if we would like to go with him in the evening, if there were no wounded, to see the fireworks. We arranged for 8 o'clock, but as it turned out we had a mildly interesting adventure of our own. Wounded came in, and I started off after daylight without lights on, a 15-kilometer run, took the wrong turning in the darkness of the woods, and lost myself. We slid nicely and gently down a moderate hill, where I expected to find a very steep one, and found ourselves in the middle of an open plain, which was every few seconds illuminated by the flares on either side and apparently in front. It was evident we were near the lines, but where? There was not a soul to be seen. We crept along slowly and silently until we came to a crossroad, and then waited. There was no noise, only pretty fireworks. At last the sound of horses and a troop of cavalry came along, and we got our bearings. The road we were on is forbidden in daylight, as at one point it is quite near enough to the enemy for his snipers to have good practice, but under the protection of darkness it has the double advantage of being just a little dangerous and sufficiently well lighted by both French and German flares to make driving in the dark a pleasure. Réaucourt. We have been at Réaucourt 11 weeks. The cars have left their muddy field and are installed in one of the squares, a few of them with a very convenient downhill run to help them to start on chilly mornings. There is a fountain in the middle of the square where, with buckets and brushes and screwdriver and chisels, we clean the cars. Long rubber boots and mackintoshes are indispensable for this work. We sleep now in the long-expected barrack, at least those members who have not been fortunate enough to secure rooms. The rain comes through the barrack roof, and the wind blows in through 100 holes. It is an interesting game trying to block up the wind holes and stop the leaks. You find one leak and plug it, and then the water immediately discovers a new hole. So long as the rain doesn't drop on one's sleeping bag, it doesn't matter much, but it is irritating being awakened by drops splashing onto one's face or one's pillow. We have 2 stoves, which require much attention. Occasionally we get wood rations for nothing. Sometimes we cut trees in the forest and bring huge logs down in the place of the wounded. Coal can be got at a price. £4 for 125 pounds. If we can get a car to Bar-le-Duc or Saint-Minhol, or £7.6 locally. That works out at a pretty considerable price a ton. We were given the bare barrack, and some of us have built little rooms therein, with mackintosh sheets enclosing our 6 feet by 9 cubicles, and we have writing desks, washstands, etc., with maps, photos, and the illustrations from La Vie Parisienne as decorations. Everything is damp. For those who fear rheumatism, the only course is to sleep in one's underclothes. They are sure to be dry. We can even get hot baths at the military bathing establishment. We eat in the tent, which has now a floor, and can even sit in it in warm weather. It also has a stove, which eats wood and warms those who sit very near it. Between the tent and the barrack we have constructed paths of stone, and trenched them on either side. They help to keep us out of the worst mud. We are doing very little work. About 7 cars are on duty every 24 hours. 2 on alternate days at the local ambulance, where at any time of the day or night they are called upon to transfer sick or wounded to other hospitals or railway centres within a radius of 15 miles. At last we have got a room to ourselves there, where we can sit in cold weather, cook our food, and sleep. Two cars go up every day to Cette-Fontaine, within half a mile of the Germans, another close to the Maison Forestière. 3 cars are on emergency duty, taking whatever turns up. At Cette-Fontaine and the Maison, we sleep on stretchers in dugouts. I don't know whether these places are shell-proof. We haven't had a direct hit yet, but it probably depends upon the caliber of the gun. Cette-Fontaine is occasionally interesting. We are in front of some of the trenches, but these are merely for communication. In the half-mile before the land of desolation, the earth is trenched and tunnelled and chambered to a depth of 30 or 40 feet. There are long concrete passages and innumerable sleeping rooms all deep down, protected by many meters of solid ground. They are airless and damp. You walk through mud and water to them, and crouch under damp beams down steep, rickety stairs. The rabbits and the rats live under similar conditions, but they are used to it and made for it. For us it is hideous, ugly, and sordid. One longs in these miserable holes for the pure air and the blessed daylight. The Hun is, I suppose, entrenched in the same way. In the front are the mortars and aerial torpedoes, far back the guns. Neither side moves. They have been there since the Battle of the Aisne, and are prepared to stay there for all time, apparently. One night, when I was up with 3 other Englishmen, the Boches began bombarding our poste de secours. Safe in my dugout, I heard the shells scream and burst. One exploded right inside our little salle à manger, 7 feet square, and blew it to the 4 winds, and with it some of our belongings. We dug out the base of the 105 105mm shrapnel buried 2 feet deep under what was our dining table. Bits of the wooden walls were found leaning up against our cars about 20 feet away, but neither was touched. My sponge bag and my Primus lamp were, alas, hopelessly ruined, and we spent an interesting hour saving other details from the mud. The French evidently felt that this shell, and another which got the RC kitchen the following night, hadn't quite played the game, so for 3/4 of an hour their guns rained shells on the German trenches. They screamed over our heads like the noise of a hurricane through the rigging of a big sailing ship, 200 or more to the minute. We listened, awed but delighted. Except for an occasional shrapnel and the falling bullets from anti-aircraft guns, we haven't had any fun since, but alas, our little dining room has gone, never to return. Luke and the Maison Dugout. A listening post in the Argonne. D.L. Oliver. Maison Forestière. Mining. From the poste de secours we carry down at all hours of the night or day the sick and wounded. The 12 miles run to Réaucourt is easy work in the daylight, but at night, in the fogs on these greasy, heavily cambered roads, with deep ditches on either side, and down steep hills into the valley, it is always more or less a physical strain. Beyond a certain point we are allowed to use our lights, but even an acetylene headlight in a fog does not penetrate more than about 10 yards. 2 cars, fortunately both empty, have already been upset. There are, however, comparatively few wounded. This is a quiet sector, though so near Verdun, and there seems to be something of a mutual understanding. If you don't worry us, we won't worry you. The chief method of warfare here is mining. One side or the other tunnels under the land of desolation, places many tons of explosives there, and then ignites it electrically. The result is a volcanic disturbance. A new crater is formed, our dugout shakes, and we are rudely awakened. It is said that the men on the one side have a knack of warning their opponents in return for a similar attention on the other, but the rules of the game seem to be rather complex. The other day I met the French colonel wearing a broad smile and rubbing his hands. "Yes, we had a good day yesterday," he told me. "We blew up a small mine, and the enemy occupied it. Then we discharged on another underneath and got a general, some of his staff, and about 60 men." But these are rare incidents, and as a rule the lines are tranquil. The guns roar and the shells shriek around, but only in a half-hearted way. Once or twice in the night-time down in the valley we have heard the roar of the Verdun artillery rolling over us, and have wondered why we were not there. Douaumont has fallen to the French, and Vaux been retaken. The Germans are as far from Verdun as they were 9 months ago. The convoy knows that district well, and would gladly be back in it again. But alas, it seems likely to be Réaucourt all the winter. We are having all the discomforts of war, and none of the fun. So far, not even a car has been seriously hit, though it is rather marvelous how they escaped. Mine, with myself on it, was in the outside zone of a shrapnel the other day. Bullets splashed all round, digging up the earth, but not a touch on the car. Do the shrapnel recognize that we are non-combatants and are only there to succor the wounded?